In the public imagination, Vikings are often depicted as fearless seafarers in long ships and brave warriors. However, behind this romanticized image lay a dark reality, a thriving human trafficking industry that formed the bedrock of their wealth. Human flesh was converted into silver, and women became a form of currency. In the bustling markets of Dublin, Hedeby, and Birka, enslaved women were not merely property but valuable commodities, destined for reproduction, ritual sacrifice, and the gratification of their owners' desires. What horrific events unfolded in these markets? How did Viking law protect the interests of buyers while completely disregarding the rights of the sold? And why do archaeological findings reveal events that the sagas prefer to silence? The Vikings were not content with merely capturing prisoners. They transformed slavery into a profitable industry. From the 9th to the 11th centuries, Scandinavian traders transported human cargo across 3 continents. Irish monasteries burned, Saxon villages emptied, and Slavic settlements vanished overnight. Survivors of these raids were sent in chains to major trading cities, where their bodies were converted into jingling coins. In 942 AD, on Crane Street in Dublin, wooden pens stretched along the dark waters of the River Liffey, designed to hold slaves. Irish chroniclers called this place the Market of White Slaves, referring not to the captives' skin color, but to the gleam of silver changing hands. A Scandinavian merchant named Olaf meticulously inspected 23 women captured in Clocko. The youngest was just 12 years old, and the oldest was pregnant with a child unlikely to survive the journey to Iceland. Market economics here followed simple arithmetic. A healthy woman was valued at 12 ounces of silver by Dublin weights. A pregnant woman fetched 14 ounces, provided the child survived weaning. Defective goods, those with missing fingers, branded faces, or broken spirits, sold for 8 ounces or even less. The silver originated from Islamic trade routes, minted in Baghdad and Samarkand, bearing Arabic prayers whose meaning was unknown to anyone in Dublin. Women were not just sold, they were purposefully bred. 11th century Norwegian legal codes regulated these processes with chilling brutality. A female slave who bore a child to her owner received no rights. The child became the property of the father. If she bore a child to another man, both mother and child could be sold separately or killed at the owner's discretion. Archaeological excavations in Hedeby shed light on this system. Analysis of bones found in the settlement's slave quarters revealed numerous pregnancies in women aged 15 to 30. Their bones showed signs of stress, malnutrition during pregnancy, repeated fractures, and chronic anemia. One skeleton bore evidence of at least 7 births. The woman died at the age of 28. Slave breeding was not accidental. Scandinavian traders selected women based on specific traits. Fair-haired Irish and Saxon women were particularly sought after in the markets of Constantinople. Slavic women skilled in crafts, weaving, metalworking, knowledge of herbs, were highly valued in wealthy Scandinavian homes as productive assets. Dark-haired Celtic women often remained in Scandinavia as concubines and domestic servants. Religious festivals were often accompanied by brutal rituals. Ibn Fadlan described the burial of a Rus noble on the Volga in 921 AD. A slave girl voluntarily offered to die with her master, believing she would reach Valhalla. She was plied with drink until insensible. 10 men raped her on the dead chieftain's ship amidst the chanting crowd. Then, the angel of death, an old woman with iron teeth and disheveled hair, slit her throat with a curved blade. The girl's body was burned with her master. Her death was meant to ensure his passage to the afterlife. This ritual was widespread throughout the Scandinavian world. Paired burials are found in the graves of Birka, wealthy men interred with young women whose necks bear knife marks. The women lack grave goods, stripped of everything even in death. The laws of the time protected buyers, but not the bought. If a slave escaped, the owner had the right to pursue them throughout Scandinavia. Capture resulted in branding. A red-hot iron burned a mark onto the forehead, warning other communities. A second escape attempt was punished by severing the hamstrings, permanently depriving the person of normal movement. A third escape attempt was met with death. However, the law also established some limitations. Killing another's slave incurred compensation, paid not to the deceased, but to their owner. The amount of compensation was determined by the purchase price and the estimated value of their labor. A skilled woman might be worth 20 ounces of silver, an unskilled worker 6 ounces. No compensation was paid for children under 2 until they became able-bodied. The slave trade spawned an entire industry. Professional slave catchers operated throughout Ireland and Britain, knowing which monastery held treasures, which villages were poorly defended, and during which seasons the population was most vulnerable. Thorvald the Red led raids into remote Scottish valleys. His forces attacked isolated farms during harvest, when men were far from their weapons. Each raid followed a well-rehearsed pattern. Scouts identified targets in advance. Ships approached the shore at dawn, when defenders were deepest in sleep. Warriors surrounded settlements to prevent anyone from escaping or raising an alarm. Killings were swift. The elderly, young boys, anyone who could not work or reproduce, were ruthlessly slaughtered. Valuable survivors were immediately shackled. Slaves were bound in chains to embark on their journey into bondage. Transport ships, traversing the seas, carried specialized equipment necessary for moving live cargo. Iron shackles, like ominous jewelry, were crafted in various sizes to fit the wrists and ankles of men, women, and even children stripped of their freedom. Wooden stocks, like silent guardians, securely fastened captives, preventing movement during arduous voyages. The ship's holds, typically used for grain or timber, underwent sinister metamorphoses, reinforced with additional supports to bear the weight of human cargo, now transported in large quantities. Ventilation holes, like merciful windows into hell, sustained the slaves during storms, a grim reminder that a dead slave meant lost profit. Markets, like relentless machines, developed their own quality standards that determined the value of a human life. Traders, like connoisseurs, inspected teeth to assess the age and health of potential prey. They meticulously checked for diseases that could rapidly spread in confined spaces, transforming ship holds into floating infirmaries. Scars, like chronicles of life, told their stories. Battle wounds indicated dangerous slaves capable of resistance. Work marks pointed to useful skills, making a slave a valuable asset. Fresh brands, like seals of ownership, marked recent captures, while old brands indicated previous ownership and potential behavioral issues. Merchant houses, like scrupulous accountants, kept detailed records of every transaction. One surviving inscription, like an echo from the past, lists 43 slaves acquired in a single deal, 27 women and 16 men, mostly Irish and Saxons. The total cost of this lot was 218 ounces of silver, equivalent to the cost of 3 longships or 60 head of cattle. The inscription also notes that 12 women were pregnant, but tragically, 5 children died before the ships reached the shores of Sweden. Seasonal patterns emerged in this cruel business. Spring raids, like predatory attacks, seized people during planting season when communities were most vulnerable and unable to defend themselves effectively. Summer voyages, like caravans of death, transported slaves to distant markets, taking advantage of favorable weather. Autumn sales, like harvests of profit, brought in the silver needed for winter expenses and preparation for new raids the following year. Winter months, like a lull before the storm, were dedicated to planning and repairing ships, readying them for new journeys in search of live cargo. Trade routes, like serpents, stretched across 3 continents, connecting different worlds in a single network of slavery. Scandinavian merchants, like ruthless transporters, sailed from Dublin to Constantinople, carrying human cargo alongside amber, furs, and walrus ivory. Islamic traders, like avaricious partners, met them in Bulgar and Khwarezm, paying silver for Slavic women destined to serve in wealthy Baghdad homes. Silver, like the lifeblood of this system, flowed north, financing new raids, new ships, and new chains. Regional specialization developed, as if each region played its part in this sinister spectacle. Ireland supplied fair-haired women in high demand in Mediterranean markets. Scotland provided strong men suitable for agricultural labor in Iceland and Greenland. Baltic regions produced skilled artisans, and women experienced in textile work. Each source area faced different forms of pressure from raids and was forced to adopt defensive measures. Constantinople's markets, like insatiable consumers, craved northern women. Byzantine aristocrats, like pampered connoisseurs, preferred fair-haired slave women from Ireland and Scotland, seeing them as exotic trophies that showcased their wealth and refined taste. A blue-eyed Irish woman in Constantinople could fetch 30 gold coins, enough to acquire a small farm or a house in the city's merchant quarter. This price included transportation costs, insurance against death or injury during the journey, and, of course, the profit of the merchant who acted as an intermediary in this brutal business. The journey itself, like an unending torture, became an ordeal that broke body and spirit. Ships designed for 30 warriors carried 60 slaves in the same space, transforming the holds into overcrowded cages. Food consisted of dried fish and sour ale, just enough to prevent starvation but not to provide strength. Fresh water was strictly rationed, like a precious elixir of life, available only in limited quantities. Seasickness, like a merciless executioner, combined with despair and hopelessness, broke the spirit even before arrival at the market. Some slaves died of grief and homesickness as often as from malnutrition, becoming victims not only of physical but also moral exhaustion. Market towns, like centers of gravity, developed specialized facilities dedicated to serving the slave trade. Dublin's slave quarters, like grim ghettos, occupied nearly 10 acres along the river. Wooden barracks, like prison cells, housed hundreds of captives awaiting their fate. Watchtowers, like vigilant guards, prevented escapes, denying any hope of freedom. Medical facilities, like cynical infirmaries, treated diseases that might lower the selling price, a stark reminder that a slave was merely a commodity that had to be in good condition. Brothels, like sordid dens, catered to wealthy clients wishing to sample the goods before purchase, turning human dignity into a bargaining chip. Professional appraisers, like cold-blooded experts, evaluated human commodities, much like livestock. They assessed remaining years of labor, reproductive potential, and skill level, determining a soil's market value. A literate woman commanded a high price as a household manager, becoming a valuable asset for wealthy families. Knowledge of healing made slaves valuable for remote settlements where medical aid might be scarce. Musical abilities attracted wealthy families seeking entertainment, turning slaves into living musical instruments. But the slave trade required a constant influx of new stock. If a region was raided too often, the population would learn to hide or fight back, complicating the task for slave traders. Fortified monasteries became common in Ireland. After 950, providing refuge for those seeking protection from raids. Saxon burhs spread across England, creating fortified settlements capable of resisting attacks. Slavic tribes retreated deeper into forests, abandoning riverside settlements that had been easy targets for raids. Scandinavians adapted to changing conditions. Instead of sporadic raids, they established bases, winter camps, where they could plan systematic campaigns, transforming plunder into an organized activity. The great army that invaded England in 865 operated like a corporation, conquering territories, collecting tribute, and selling captives in established markets, turning human lives into an industrial commodity. Training programs, like sinister schools, prepared slaves for specific roles, transforming them into obedient executors of their master's will. Domestic servants learned Scandinavian customs and language to better understand and perform their duties. Agricultural workers received basic instructions on tool use to increase their productivity. Skilled artisans developed abilities that enhanced their market value, making them more attractive to potential buyers. This education was not an act of kindness or mercy, but rather an investment protection aimed at increasing profit. Skilled slaves cost more initially but yielded higher long-term returns, justifying the expense of their training. One mass grave in Ireland contains 67 skeletons, men, women, and children killed during a single raid, testifying to the brutality and inhumanity of this era. The bodies show signs of brutal violence, skull fractures from axes, stab wounds in the back, cuts on arm bones where defenders tried to block sword blows, protecting their lives and the lives of their loved ones. The youngest victim was 3 years old and the oldest over 60. Too old for slavery, too dangerous to leave alive. Such was the ruthless verdict delivered by the slave traders, devoid of pity or compassion. In the harsh realities of the Viking Age, where life and death hung by a thread, legal codes served as a cold reflection of social hierarchy, with slavery an integral part of society's fabric. Norwegian laws, like a ruthless mirror, reflected this system, drawing clear distinctions between different categories of the enslaved. Household slaves, whose fate was tied to the domestic hearth, performed a wide range of duties, from cooking and cleaning to childcare and satisfying their owners' sexual needs. Meanwhile, field slaves, like livestock, toiled in the fields and on construction sites, exhausting themselves with heavy physical labor. Craft slaves, endowed with valuable skills in metalworking, shipbuilding, and textile production, represented a particular value. Each category of slave possessed a different degree of legal protection and compensation value, reflecting their contribution to the economy and social structure. Manumission, or the freeing of a slave, existed but remained a rare occurrence. A slave could earn freedom through exceptional service or by accumulating enough silver to buy their way out. Some owners, driven by pragmatism, freed elderly slaves to avoid the burden of their upkeep. Others, influenced by religious or moral considerations, granted freedom as a gesture of mercy on their deathbed. However, for most slaves, bondage was a life sentence. Their children, born in chains, inherited their bitter fate, condemned to eternal servitude. Not all slaves were valued for their labor alone. For wealthy Scandinavian families, exotic slaves served as symbols of status and prestige, akin to exquisite jewelry or fine weapons. An Irish harpist, a Saxon embroiderer, a Slavic jeweler, each represented successful raids and extensive trade connections, testifying to the owner's wealth and influence. During feasts, slaves showcased their skills, entertaining guests, while their owners reaped the rewards of social capital, solidifying their positions in society. Women, as always, bore the heaviest burden. Scandinavian law viewed them primarily as reproductive assets, secondarily as workers, and never as individuals endowed with their own dignity and rights. A slave woman who dared to resist sexual advances faced brutal beatings or even more horrifying consequences. If she became pregnant, the child's fate depended entirely on the father's whim. Some owners raised slave children as future laborers, while others sold them immediately, profiting from their misfortune. Many simply left them to die, denying them care and sustenance. In these desperate circumstances, contraception became a science of survival. Enslaved women, driven by the instinct for self-preservation, shared knowledge of herbs capable of preventing pregnancy or inducing miscarriage. Juniper berries, tansy, and pennyroyal, these dangerous plants, consumed in secret, could offer a chance at escaping servitude, but often killed the woman herself, along with the unwanted child. This knowledge, passed down by word of mouth, became a symbol of solidarity and resistance in a world where pregnancy meant only new suffering and hardship. Slave markets, these sinister centers for trading human lives, eventually developed their own culture and rules. Professional slave traders, striving for profit, built reputations as providers of quality goods and honest partners, honest, of course, towards buyers. They branded their wards with personal marks, maintained way stations, and offered guarantees against disease or early death to alleviate potential clients' concerns. A trader's word, their personal guarantee, became the highest law in a business where trust was valued above legal formalities. Geographic expansion followed commercial success. The Dublin model spread to Cork, Waterford, and Wexford, while Hedeby dominated Baltic trade and Birka controlled Swedish markets. Kalpeng served Norwegian traders, offering a wide selection of goods and services. Each market developed its regional specialization, reflecting local raiding patterns and shipping routes. Price manipulation became a fine art. Traders, like skilled puppeteers, created artificial scarcity, holding back valuable slaves until demand peaked to maximize their profits. They spread rumors of impending raids that could flood the markets with cheap merchandise, thereby driving down prices. Wealthy buyers, leveraging their connections, received advance notice of premium arrivals, while the poor were left with damaged specimens at inflated prices. Medical knowledge, instead of serving compassion, was exploited for profit. Driven by greed, traders learned to treat common ailments that reduced the merchandise's value. They set broken bones, stitched wounds, and treated infections, guided not by empathy, but by economic necessity. A dead slave yielded no profit, a sick slave sold poorly, and a healthy slave maximized the return on investment. Thanks to its geographical location and developed infrastructure, Dublin's traders controlled the largest tea slave market in Western Europe. Access to the Irish Sea, inland river connections, and established trade routes to Scandinavia and beyond made the city an ideal hub for human trafficking. By 980 CE, approximately 3,000 slaves passed through Dublin annually, most of whom were Irish and Saxons. However, some arrived from distant lands like North Africa and the Baltics, testament to the extensive reach of Dublin's traders. Competition, acting as a driver of progress, fostered innovation. Traders offered credit terms to reliable buyers, provided delivery services to distant markets, and even established permanent outposts in Constantinople and Baghdad, expanding their network of influence. The most successful among them became wealthy merchants, owning their own fleets of ships and networks spanning entire continents. Psychological warfare, an integral part of the enslavement process, was carefully calculated to break the will and spirit of the captives. Raiders didn't merely capture people, they methodically destroyed their lives. Families were deliberately separated. Children sold to different masters and forever losing contact with their parents, and spouses sent to distant markets, doomed to eternal separation. Isolation, a powerful weapon, crushed hope and prevented organized resistance. Resistance, in turn, took various forms. Some slaves, seeing no other option, refused food, slowly dying of starvation. Others, driven by despair, attempted suicide by drowning or hanging themselves. Some, filled with rage and hatred, attacked their captors, knowing that inevitable death would follow. Most, broken and suppressed, submitted for survival, awaiting a chance for freedom that never came. Broken spirits served as a living warning, suppressing any attempts at resistance among newcomers. Nevertheless, despite all difficulties, some slaves did not lose hope and continued to fight for their freedom. Irish chronicles attest to numerous uprisings in Scandinavian settlements. Most of these, unfortunately, ended in failure. Untrained, underfed, and poorly armed rebels could not match professional warriors, but occasionally, against all odds, uprisings succeeded. In 997 CE, slaves in Waterford, seizing the moment, killed their guards and burned down the slave quarters. 43 captives broke free and fled, hoping to disappear into the Irish countryside. Enraged by the audacious escape, the Scandinavians organized a massive hunt for the fugitives that lasted for weeks. The hunt became a cruel sport, with Scandinavian warriors tracking down runaway slaves like wild animals. They used specially trained dogs capable of tracking humans by scent. Capture typically meant public torture, a brutal warning to other potential escapees. The punishment served several purposes. It deterred future escapes, entertained the Scandinavian community, and demonstrated power over the enslaved population. The Viking Age left a dark mark on history, characterized by the flourishing of market towns whose economies were inextricably linked to human trafficking. Artisans forged shackles and chains, blacksmiths branded bodies, and shipbuilders constructed vessels with reinforced holds designed for transporting live cargo. Merchants from around the world gathered here, offering silks from Constantinople, spices from Baghdad, and Baltic amber in exchange for human lives. The development of a banking system was a logical consequence of this lucrative trade. Silver merchants provided loans for large transactions, charging interest that reflected the risks of sea voyages and high mortality rates among slaves. Exchange offices converted the silver standards used across Europe and Asia, and letters of credit eliminated the need to transport heavy ingots on perilous journeys. Profits from the slave trade were staggering. A successful raid could yield 50 to 100 captives, with profitability reaching 300% or more. One example is a transaction where a Scandinavian merchant acquired 37 Irish slaves for 87 ounces of silver and resold them in Iceland for 243 ounces, yielding a 280% profit. Insurance markets also adapted to the human trade. Merchants paid premiums to cover losses from storms, diseases, or the death of slaves during transport. Insurance rates varied depending on the complexity of the route and the quality of the merchandise. Valuable slaves received better protection, while cheaper ones were transported under perilous conditions with minimal coverage. The market value of women was influenced by age, appearance, and skills. The highest prices were paid for adolescent girls capable of childbearing and labor. After the age of 30, women's value declined unless they possessed special skills such as knowledge of healing, literacy, or craftsmanship, which could extend their market. Market life, up to 40 years. Age determination played a crucial role in pricing. Traders inspected teeth, skin, and physical development to assess the age of enslaved women. Young women often lied about their age, hoping to avoid sexual exploitation, while older ones did so to avoid being discarded as useless, though deception rarely worked. Human trafficking led to long-term demographic changes. Genetic studies of Iceland's modern population have revealed significant Celtic ancestry, indicating thousands of Irish and Scottish women brought there as slaves. Similar patterns are observed in other Scandinavian settlements. The DNA of enslaved women persisted, even as their stories vanished from official records. Language barriers were used for control. Slaves unable to communicate with each other found it harder to organize resistance. Traders deliberately mixed linguistic groups to prevent coordination, separating the Irish and prohibiting Slavic languages in favor of Scandinavian ones. Communication became a privilege that owners could grant or deny. The Christian Church condemned human trafficking but could not stop it. Pope John VIII issued papal bulls against slavery, but Scandinavian raiders ignored papal authority. Some Christian merchants still participated in the trade, justifying it by claiming that buying slaves saved them from a worse fate. However, these justifications fooled no one. The trade was driven by greed, not compassion. Church officials sometimes purchased slaves for liberation, but this practice created a moral hazard by providing slave traders with reliable buyers. The church's silver financed new raids and new captives, leading to unforeseen consequences. Scandinavian poetry glorified successful raids, ignoring their human cost. Skaldic verses praised warriors, but remained silent about children sold in foreign markets and women who died in childbirth far from home. This literary silence reflected deliberate oblivion. Heroic culture demanded that certain truths remain buried. Meanwhile, oral traditions among the enslaved population preserved other stories. Songs passed between women contained coded references to their home, villages, family names, and escape routes. Scandinavians, not understanding these languages, dismissed the singing as harmless entertainment. These songs became a lifeline, connecting the present with a lost past. Archaeological findings reveal the scale of the slave trade. Silver hoards in Norway contain Arabic coins that financed human trafficking, and ship burials include exotic items acquired from slave profits. Mass graves near trade centers contain hundreds of skeletons with signs of malnutrition and violence, while building foundations incorporate slave quarters into the layout of market towns. Harbor modifications indicate the construction of ships specifically designed for transporting people. The decline of this grim market began in the late 11th century. In the late 11th century, Europe's Christian kingdoms, fortifying their borders, transformed cities into impregnable fortresses. Legislative acts increasingly restricted the practice of slavery, affecting even Scandinavian communities. The Christianization of Scandinavia, gradually changing societal norms, contributed to the decline of the slave trade, though economic motives played a more significant role than moral convictions. Nevertheless, political transformations accelerated this process. The Norman conquest of England disrupted traditional Viking raiding patterns. Irish kings, uniting, resisted Scandinavian settlements. Slavic principalities, organizing effective defenses, deprived Vikings of easy prey. A reduction in undefended targets made raids more risky and less profitable. However, the markets did not disappear without a trace, but evolved. Open slave trading gradually gave way to debt bondage and serfdom. Legal slavery, though outlawed, continued to exist under different names. The chains became invisible, but their strength remained the same. Economic shifts completed the transformation. Increased agricultural production reduced the demand for slave labor, and technological innovations made free laborers more productive than forced ones. A monetary economy, replacing the barter system based on human trafficking, rendered the slave trade economically unfeasible. Changes in trade routes delivered the decisive blow. The rise of Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa created new routes that bypassed traditional Scandinavian trade networks. The Crusades opened direct links between Western Europe and the Middle East. Scandinavian intermediaries lost their monopolistic position in the slave trade. Archival documents from the period clearly demonstrate the decline of the slave trade. Tax revenues from Dublin's slave market plummeted from £200 of silver annually in 1020 CE to £300 by 1060 CE. The number of licenses issued to slave traders decreased from 47 in 1040 CE to 12 in 1080 CE. These figures narrate events not recorded in chronicles. Cultural memory faded rapidly. By 1100 CE, Scandinavian sagas rarely mentioned slavery, only as a minor detail. Christian chroniclers focused on religious conversion, ignoring economic exploitation. Victims left no written records, and their suffering was erased from history. Recent archaeological excavations at Woodquay, a suburb of Dublin, uncovered the foundations of a medieval slave market, stone platforms where people were displayed for sale like livestock, iron rings for chains, and a mass grave containing the remains of over 200 individuals. No signs of battle wounds were found on the bones. These were not warriors fallen in battle, but those who died awaiting sale. Their silent suffering still echoes in the stones.